Alright guys, we're going on a nostalgia trip today. Undoubtedly, like most people, I heard about the new Motorola RAZR foldable phone that came out recently, and it was notable because, of course, it was similar to the original one in more ways than just name. Basically, they pretty much replicated the original design of the RAZR in that phone as closely as they could, and then found out a way to engineer a smartphone into it. And anyways, that's not what this video is about, but it really kind of ties into what I'm trying to portray here, because when I first started my YouTube channel, I was absolutely obsessed with the original Motorola RAZR V3. I thought that this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, of course, I was like 11, 12 years old at the time, and, you know, obviously did not have money or the need, actually, for an iPhone at the time. I kind of thought that smartphones were kind of stupid, and of course, this didn't last very long, but there was a period in my life where I just thought that a good old-fashioned cell phone was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so anyways, I had an obsession with this phone, and little known fact, my first YouTube channel was not this one. It was actually a handle that I created, and the name was actually RAZR V3 Lover. I shit you not. And it only lasted about a month before I realized how kind of stupid that name was, and so I created this channel to replace it. But anyways, the point is, I was absolutely obsessed with this phone at the time. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, and we're also going to talk about the original successor to the RAZR, which is not actually a new one that's come out right now. But anyways, this phone was iconic for the time. I mean, I wasn't really around when this phone was brand new, but again, this was like 2008, 2009-ish. I was totally obsessed with it, and so I'm going to try and replicate this story as closely as I can. So, from my understanding, Motorola was not doing very well in the early 2000s. They were losing a ton of money, and, you know, they had like a million different smartphone models. None of them were selling very well, and et cetera, until they created this. And I think I and a lot of other people would call this phone, the RAZR V3, the iPhone before the iPhone, because in a lot of ways it was. This phone prioritized aesthetic design over functionality. And, of course, I believe for the time this was also the thinnest clamshell phone available. Of course, you know, it was known for being very expensive, very stylish. Of course, you know, it was quite aesthetic, at least compared to a lot of phones that were also out at the time. And it also was known probably for not being all that great. It had a terrible camera, even for the time. And, you know, it prioritized aesthetics over everything else. And so and it was also expensive, like I said. I think this thing was like $400 or $500 on contract at the time, which was kind of crazy. But anyways, this thing was a smash hit. They sold, I think, something like 130 million units over the 4-year run. Yeah, I was one of the people that was totally obsessed with this phone, just because at the time, the design was super cool, and of course we had those cool Hello Moto commercials from back in the day, and a bunch of stuff like that. You know, I do quite still like the design, you know, from a retro standpoint. This chin was pretty iconic for the time, and, you know, this electroluminescent keypad, pretty cool. Of course, the screen was not high resolution, the camera was pretty terrible, but, you know, this was just a good phone, and I really liked it. You might be asking why I have 4 of these. I just basically collected these over the years. Didn't pay much for them. I got them at like thrift stores and stuff. And these two, this one I believe works, but has a crappy battery in it. This one was the one that was in the best shape, which I'll get to in a minute, and this one is missing a back cover and I don't think works at all. But anyhow, a common design flaw on these RAZRs was the hinge, and let's see, this one is actually a pretty good example. The hinge can actually just start doing that over time, and basically there is a plastic like retainer thing, and it's split into 2 pieces so the display cable can go up through there. But anyways, one of these tends to break, and then that makes the hinge nice and loose. And so the pink one was actually the one with the hinge in the greatest condition. And so I actually just finished swapping over the entire outer casing onto the pink like mid-frame, I guess, because, you know, I'm a dude. I don't think rocking a pink phone is all that cool. And so I made this one the one with the best hinge. Of course, this one doesn't have any play in it, and I also ended up putting all the little nubs in for the display. So this one is my best condition, most complete RAZR now. But I mean, we have, let's see, I don't think I have any pictures on here, but you guys can see here that the camera is pretty terrible. Not very surprising. I believe this phone only has like 50 megabytes of internal storage, and you know, at VGA resolution, you're not going to be taking up a ton of room anyways, but still, it was just not very good. And of course, we had the, let's see, where is it? The original. Yeah. The original Motorola ringtones, and yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to take a look back at this, you know, 16 years later and just kind of reminisce. So, but there was actually a successor to this that was not the original, was not the new one, and that was actually the Motorola RAZR II, which I also have here. Now this phone, I actually had this phone before I ended up having a V3, and don't ask me why that is. It was just a weird timeline that I was on at the time. But with that said, this was the actual successor, direct successor to the original RAZR V3. And this, of course, this phone came out in 2008. By that time, the iPhone had already released. Smartphones were really gaining traction at the time. You know, PDAs kind of took hold in the early 2000s, but I'm gonna say most people still had regular, you know, clamshell phones like this. But when this phone came out, smartphones are already pretty popular, and so naturally, I don't think this thing had nearly as much of an effect on the market as the original one, but this was my first RAZR before this one. Of course, I ended up, I think, damaging my original one, but this is one I got on eBay several years ago. But anyways, this thing was a major improvement in a lot of areas. I believe this had a 2 megapixel camera instead of the original VGA camera on the original. Of course, they made later versions that had a megapixel camera, as you can see here, but it was still pretty terrible. But anyways, we now had a much larger front screen, and we also had 3 capacitive buttons, which don't work when it's locked. But yeah, otherwise they moved the buttons to the bottom of the phone. It's a little bit thinner, not by a ton, but yeah, so this phone, of course, was quite a little bit better. The screen was better quality, you know, it had a lot of things that the original one didn't have. And this one also supported 3G data networks, which was kind of cool. But yeah, this was just, again, a direct successor to the original. It works pretty much the same way. It has a little bit of an updated version of the software, but again, it works pretty much identically at a basic level to the original. But yeah, I just wanted to take this trip down memory lane because I was hearing a lot of things about the new RAZR, and that kind of just sparked, you know, the original intent of my YouTube channel and stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, guys, that is pretty much just a retro, like, nostalgic type look at the original Motorola RAZRs before this new one we have. And of course, the new one can be an entirely different video on its own. I think it's just as cool from an aesthetic standpoint as this phone was back in the day, but I think it's far too expensive and it has far too many compromises. It's not a phone I would actually buy if I needed like a daily use phone. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.